Hi guys, DevilHunterXYZ, and this is a movie review on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And as you can see, I do have the cat with me again. I gotta say, This movie is pretty unique. It has its own charm in some way, but I gotta say, for the most part, it's actually not a bad movie in general. So let's get to it. Alright, for the summary of the movie, well, it kind of starts out in like a flashback, telling more of the events that happened before the first movie, kind of showing more about Peter's parents, and well, there was pretty much a scene where Richard and Mary Parker were in a plane, and they were on a hijacked plane apparently because there was some kind of assassination attempt. They right before Richard dies, he manages to upload something, and next thing we know, we see the plane crashing, I guess, because all of a sudden it just kind of cuts into Peter Parker as Spider-Man, pursuing after a pursuing after a villain who hijacked an armored vehicle containing some kind of Oscorp-related thing. He does manage to stop him, but at the same time, during this whole chase scene, he does encounter, well, our famous villain in this movie, Max Dillon, played by Jamie Foxx, and well, yeah, you see him, he's just a random stranger just carrying blueprints around. He just feels so unnoticed. Spider-Man does save him from getting crushed by a car. Uh, where he does tell him that Max is important in the world and his eyes and ears or something like that. But anyway, they had the initial chase of the armored vehicle. Spider-Man does stop him, and conveniently at this time he's supposed to be at his graduation ceremony in high school, and he does make it there like right at the very last minute as soon as they called his name. Which, on a side note, we actually do see a cameo appearance of Stan Lee in the crowd, which is kind of nice. I mean, seeing Stan Lee in cameo appearances in all his Marvel movies. Well, anyway, afterwards we did cut to a scene of the whole celebration afterwards of the whole graduation ceremony. Peter's kind of still haunted by the words of Gwen's father of trying to leave her out of his life, and it kind of gets little bit turmoil right there, where Peter, he loves Gwen, but at the same time he knows they can't be together. And this whole thing kind of continues on for a while. Then eventually cuts to another scene where we see Harry Osborn, who apparently gets in contact with his father, and just right before he dies, he tells Harry that the disease that plagued him is genetic, and he's gonna die eventually of the same type of disease, which haunts him apparently. Uh, Soon after, we do see the next morning where Norman does die. It comes on the news. Then you see Max Dillon going to work like normal and still a nobody. Uh, and then it kind of cuts to a scene where he does try to repair the electrical equipment, which initially causes him to that fateful accident, and he becomes Electro. Then afterwards, we did cut to a scene of Harry taking over Oscorp Ministries, trying to find the cure for the disease that he has. And at the time, Peter does pay a visit to Harry after some unknown number of years, and pretty much they were just hanging out, just trying to regather what they have in common, and just trying to be good friends, I guess. Then we cut to a scene later of just Peter and Gwen hanging out after some confusing issues about what's been going on. Then we later found out that Gwen was apparently going to England for some kind of medical position. And afterwards, we then cut to a scene of Electro walking into Times Square, absorbing electricity, Spider-Man figures out it's actually Max, and he tries to calm him down to try to see if he can reason with him. But of course, some kind of thing happens, and he ends up going berserk and starts attacking everyone. And then he has to go into his little engagement. Of course, in the end, Electro gets he gets taken down and taken away into like an institute. And at the time, we do see the first sign of Harry's illness taking in. Like we do see like a mark on his neck, and realize he's running out of time. So he does plead with Parker that there was a cure that they were developing, which requires some kind of spider DNA or something, and he realizes it does. Well, he realizes that he needs Spider-Man's blood in order to make this work. Whether or not it does work or not, it's really questionable. Of course, Peter Parker as Spider-Man confronts Harry later in the scene, says that he couldn't give him his blood because of the dangers of what might happen. Um, Causes Harry to kind of throw a fit and kind of thinks that Spider-Man is just a traitor. Anyway, we do see scenes later of Peter, in the meantime, still trying to figure out what has happened to his parents, specifically his father, what has happened to him. And then it kind of gets to a point where Aunt May tells him the truth that she believes that Richard Parker was a traitor to his family and friends and Oscorp Industries, but Peter does eventually find out a secret location underground in like an abandoned subway where he has all his equipment still set up, and he finds out that Richard Parker betrayed everyone only because that he was afraid of what Norman Osborn at the time was going to do, using all the scientific stuff for preparing for war or whatnot. And afterwards, we do see that Harry is still trying to find a cure. He comes across incriminating evidence that the board members are trying to frame him for the cover-up for the whole incident that happened with Max Dillon. And afterwards, Harry just devises some kind of elaborate scheme to break out Electro from the Institute and try to take over Oscorp Industries, for both of them having two individual goals. And at the time, there's a whole relationship between Peter and Gwen. They're just kind of going separate ways. When Gwen's trying to leave to England, but Peter tries to acknowledge his love to Gwen, and it kind of goes kind of hard to explain really about that. But anyway, then goes a scene where Electro causes a huge blackout in the city, and pretty much Peter's just trying to go one-on-one against Electro to bring him down, and at the same time Gwen follows him and tries to repair the whole power grid of the city, which they are successful. And then right out of nowhere, we do see Harry, who after finding the cure for his illness, who at the time is now the Green Goblin, he ends up finding out that it was Peter who was Spider-Man, and believed that Peter betrayed his friendship with Harry. So then he goes and kidnaps Gwen and has his final confrontation in a clock tower. Peter does defeat Harry, but unfortunately Gwen gets killed in this whole commotion, which is kind of devastating. Afterwards, after the whole funeral thing, we just pretty much see scenes of Peter apparently spending numerous days throughout the seasons just mourning over Gwen Stacy. And he got to the point where he pretty much gave up becoming Spider-Man, and it really wasn't until hearing the speech she made on the graduation day that kind of rekindled his spirits, and it kind of urged him to continue what he was been doing, just protecting the city, living out his life. Alright, and in the end, we do see the same guy who kidnapped the armored vehicle in the beginning of the movie. It turns out he's actually Alexei, the same guy who pretty much controls the Rhino. Pretty much, we saw the same guy, the same shadowed guy from the first movie. He confronted Harry in the same institute, And to me, it kind of seems like they're planning some kind of big villain thing. I mean, it could be like the Sinister Six, who all we know. But anyway, they did break out the guy to become Rhino, and we do see in the end of the movie the whole confrontation between him and Spider-Man. And unfortunately, the movie ends right as the battle begins. Well, for pros, I can first say there is a lot of action. I mean, after all, this is a Spider-Man movie. I mean, there's a lot of action from start to finish. Especially, I think probably my best part would be the fight between Spider-Man and Electro. And another thing, I would have to say, kind of the redeeming factor when it comes to the villains. I mean, not just stock, not just villains that just become evil for the sake of it. They actually kind of seem to have emotion built into it. I mean, Electro, for instance, he's just a lonely guy that wants to be noticed, and I mean, he just kind of feels like he's just nothing more. He just feels nothing in the world, like no one doesn't know that he exists. And as for Harry, he's trying to find a way to cure himself. He's just afraid of dying. He wants to stop the disease from, you know, taking his life. So, in a way, you almost kind of feel sorry for these guys. And of course, there's like the whole turmoil between Gwen and Peter throughout this entire movie, and actually, there's a little bit of turmoil between Peter and his aunt. Uh, I mean, it's just kind of a little bit of emotion in built in this movie, which I do like. Well, for the cons, well, unfortunately, I have to say that I'm still not fond of Andrew Garfield being Peter Parker or slash Spider-Man. Um, I just don't really believe him in the role. I mean, if this was Tobey Maguire, I really could see him being a nerd. It's just Tobey Maguire's appearance as Spider-Man seemed more believable. I mean, it felt like he is Spider-Man. But when it comes to Andrew Garfield, it just felt like he's a guy pretending to be Spider-Man. I think really because of his attitude. I mean, he just kind of arrogant and cocky and just goofs around at times. It's just I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. And there really is any nerdy aspect to him at all in this movie. And then another thing is kind of those moments where it just feels rushed or incomplete. Uh, well, I mean, like for instance, we have there was a scene where Peter tries to email photos to Jameson at the Daily Bugle, which kind of boggles me because when did he ever get a job at the Daily Bugle? That was never established. And for kind of another weird thing is why is he emailing the photos? Why isn't he actually taking it to Jameson? I mean, if we're going to establish that he works at the Daily Bugle, it would have been nice to actually see him at the building and maybe see A. Jameson, but who knows, maybe they couldn't fund for an actual building. And then also, I mean, there was an instance of the ending. I mean, they just ended right at the beginning of a good fight, or who knows, a supposedly good fight. I mean, it's probably obvious that Spider-Man was going to win it, but it would have been nice to actually see it. Well, the cat came back for this one. And for conclusion, I can say this movie is pretty good. It's not as good as the original series, but I still think it's pretty good in terms of a Spider-Man movie. If some of the stuff was ironed out, it probably could have been even better. I mean, this movie was a little bit overhyped with having three villains when really it was just one good one, Electro. And at times it does kind of get a little odd and goofy, but overall the action is kind of worthwhile for it. And as a really a plus, I did see this also in 3D, which in my opinion I think it actually will work either 3D or not. It's not really necessary, but it's kind of more of an open opinion out there. But anyway, for my opinion for the score, I would give this a 7.5 out of 10 and say that this is a highly average movie. It's a little bit above average and it's pretty good. I would say it's really worth watching. Like, give it a look at. especially for those who are actually Spider-Man fans. And we can only wait until the next couple of movies. From what I've been hearing, there are going to be 2 more sequels for this series. Anyway, this is DevilHunterXYZ. Until next time.